let me welcome you to the conversation segment of the Signature Show. Now, in the past 2 or 3 weeks, part of national conversation has been the proposal by the federal government to sell some of its assets, some of its properties in the states as a means of generating funds to implement the 2021 budget. There has been the argument that that policy is short-sighted in the sense that it doesn't look beyond now, when the Nigerian state could be running more efficiently, when the federal government could need some of these properties to service the needs of the nation in a more efficient manner. That this policy is just being driven by the present financial inconveniences which our nation is facing. But beyond that, some people argue that it is part of the national profligacy that there's no thinking issues thoroughly before government moves into them, and the tendency for the nation to throw money at its problems that is driving the new policy. But is it all there is to it? Now, we know that the non-governmental organization, the socio-economic rights and accountability project, incidentally, that organization has been taken over by its short name SERAP. SERAP, the socio-economic rights and accountability project, has written the National Assembly opposing this policy of selling off properties to fund in the 2021 budget, and asking the National Assembly not to cooperate with the federal government in implementing this new policy. Now, this Sunday in our conversation, I'll be speaking with Kola Wole Oluwadare. Kola Wole is Deputy Director for SERAP. Now, I'm interviewing him via Zoom because he's far away in Ikeja in Lagos, whereas we are here in Abuja. Kola Wole, you are welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Now, Kola, you may have heard the background to this conversation. Let me ask you first and foremost, why did SERAP write the National Assembly? And what does it want the National Assembly to do?
Thank you very much, Dr. SERAP took that step as part of what we do as our advocacy as government. And that is on the basis of SERAP being the citizens of Nigeria too. SERAP is made up of citizens, individuals of citizens of Nigeria, and an equal stakeholder in the Nigerian process. And the National Assembly is empowered by the provisions of Section 4 of the Constitution to make laws for the good and welfare and well-being of Nigerians. And they have such powers, including oversight functions over the functions of the executive. And we've seen that this step by the government to sell public assets to raise funds is not in the public interest. And that's why we've taken that step, that the National Assembly should act in the interest of Nigerians who form the various constituents who have elected them to that office, to stop what we've seen as a danger to public interest from going on. And this is best viewed within the context of what we've seen in Nigeria and what is going on presently. What we've seen is a rather act of desperation on the part of the government to raise funds for what they call for public revenue. But importantly, this calls to question about the cost of governance itself, which we've not seen any kind of action on the part of the government to address at all. We've seen a growing deficit in our budget year in, year out. Last year was over 2 trillion. 2021 is over 5 trillion, 5.6 trillion naira today. And with the budget that 24% is being used to service debt, and with our growing debt profile of over 30 trillion naira, is this not the best time to cut the cost of governance? Now, that desperation again is seen in the act of the federal government with the Finance Act 2020, which SERAP has also addressed in a letter to the president, where we've seen government trying to borrow, in quotes, funds and dormant accounts of individuals without their consent. We've seen the same government, by virtue of Section 75 and 77 of the Finance Act 2020, also laying claim to funds, to unclaimed dividend funds, creating a trust without the consent of these individuals. This is clearly in breach of constitutional provisions, and that's Section 44(1) of the Constitution, which stops government from compulsorily acquiring properties of Nigeria. These and these various acts of desperation only mean that government is trying to get this much needed funds without doing the needful, which is first and foremost stopping waste and then cutting the cost of government. Those are two different issues. We can look at the first one in stopping waste. There are various avenues of wastages in Nigeria, even through the budgetary process, the expenditures, and by way of procurement. For instance, we can look at the Auditor General's report that has been issued over the years. The latest one that was released some weeks ago is that of Part 1 of 2018, which details several billions of naira that has not been accounted for by NGA. We can look at the 2017 audit report, which is further behind the 2018 report. And it raises questions that over 800 billion naira has not been accounted for by various NGAs in Nigeria. So the question is, what has the government done to recover these funds before we talk of borrowing or sale of public assets? And I've just mentioned two of the reports. The Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly statutorily vested with these powers under Section 88 of the Constitution. We have not seen any kind of action from them, either by way of the report of the Public Accounts Committee or resolutions that have been made pursuant to that. SERAP has even taken the step to issue a freedom of information request to the National Assembly, asking for the outcomes of this corruption probe. So what we've seen are various avenues of leakages in Nigeria, and that is just part of the accountability cycle. We have not even talked about the procurement and the various capital projects that we've seen all over Nigeria. We've not seen government take any steps to block these leakages. Then we can go a second into the areas of the cost of running government in Nigeria. The National Assembly is just one of the three arms of government. And the National Assembly in 2020 budgeted 128 billion for itself. This year, the budget also is slightly above 128 billion. And this amount is by statutory transfer, by the way, which puts it as part of the first line charge. We've seen the fleet maintained by the president for the church. And the question we need to ask is, do we need to run government this way? And that is beside the various recurrent expenditures that goes into pays and allowances of elected and appointed public officers. And that even calls the question, if I may ask, how much does an average senator in Nigeria take home? It has become so much of a controversy that we are not sure. We do not know. We can talk of security votes to put it in proper context. These are money paid to nearly all public officers in Nigeria that do not have any statutory backing, and they amount to billions of naira. The Transparency International report of 2017 details how security votes of 2017 was more than the budget of the army itself. We can talk of pension paid to former governors in Nigeria. A governor that serves for 4 or 8 years earns more, much more, than the average civil servant who dedicates 30 years of his life to serving the state.
Let us narrow it down to this new policy by the federal government, and allow me to be a little native in my next question. It is commonsensical say in Nigeria that a man uses what he has to solve his problems. If a man has a bicycle and is cash strapped and needs to attend to something, he will sell his bicycle and use the money to solve his problems. Nigeria's economic experience today is that because of the COVID-19 and some other international factors, Nigeria's resource base has shrunk. But its problems have not reduced, and therefore it is looking for a means of raising funds to solve some of the problems that affect the ordinary citizen. And the government wants to use the property it has, sell them off, get some money to solve the problems of the citizens. It's not commonsensical. It's not just right that a man should use what he has to resolve his problems.
Saying we do not have a problem, except the problem of blocking a leaking bucket without putting new water in the bucket. So the problem is not lack of funds, as the government will make us believe, but where are the funds that have either been appropriated or borrowed gone to over the years? And that is the important question that I have mentioned about the various avenues of waste that has not been blocked. So what is the guarantee, Aurora, that if this sale goes through and these public assets are sold, that the funds will not go the way of previous borrowed funds and appropriated funds? Again, we can ask, what are those transparency and accountability mechanisms and the legal framework that has been put into this proposed sale that would prevent sales to friends of political parties? And we can even have a position of undersale. We have not yet seen that. And so what we are saying is that there are other avenues for government to raise this much needed public funds than to resort to the sale of public assets. And like someone has asked me, if we sell this public asset and the deficit of the budget keeps growing, from last year was 2.3, was over 2 trillion, this year is 5.6 trillion. Next year, if perhaps of a chance it's 7 trillion, what are we going to sell? And that calls to question whether we have a strategic plan in keeping with the Fiscal Responsibility Act about how to manage our resources effectively and efficiently. So to answer your question, it is not a problem to solve by sale of public assets. But the real problem is to cut the various avenues of waste to allow what we have to be enough. Last year we had over 10 trillion dollars. This year it's 7 trillion. We have the National Assembly adding 506 billion to the budget. The same National Assembly is in the know that we have a deficit and added to it. So it is not a problem of selling assets to solve the problem, but the real problem is managing what we have.
Kola, I'm going to digress a little bit, arising from the assignment you've given to the National Assembly. The National Assembly is made up of the representatives of the people who ought ordinarily be doing this job we are doing, raising the alarm when certain policies are going to hurt the citizen, as you just observed. Raising the alarm and in fact raising objection when certain policies do not enhance national development. Raising the alarm when you are putting a new wine in an old wine skin. If you force it, the skin will burst. That's just what they're saying. Can I safely say that the National Assembly is not really performing to its optimum?
That it will be seen by their responses to the initiatives and advocacy and even the demands of their constituents. One example is what we've just done in writing to the National Assembly. Our letter to the National Assembly is just a reminder to the members of the National Assembly to play their statutory roles under Section 4 of the Constitution, that they should not allow this to go. For SERAP cannot do this alone. As you mentioned, they have various constituents who have voted them into office. And what we should expect is that those citizens should ask their constituents, their National Assembly members, what their position is on this matter, and to make their own individual position known to the National Assembly. The members in the National Assembly, he or she is not representing him or herself, but representing the people. SERAP has had its say. So what is left of those people to convey their own thoughts and feelings and opinions on this matter to the National Assembly. But our opinion in this matter is very clear, and it is contained in that letter. The National Assembly should not allow this for the reasons you clearly stated. There are other options save costs, to manage the resources we have, rather than the sales of other countries. And that starts with the National Assembly reducing their costs. This is the National Assembly that budgeted over 30 billion naira to renovate the National Assembly complex. This is the National Assembly that added 506 billion to the 2021 budget. So we are reminding National Assembly that this is the time to rise up and play the roles that they took an oath to act in the best interest of Nigerians and their constituents. This reminder is something that we hope that they will really take an action.
Kola, let me take you to the monies already borrowed by the federal government and which debts must be serviced. Those monies borrowed and the consequential debt servicing, let me call them a fait accompli. We cannot reverse them. And the obligation of the Nigerian government is to service those debts. If not, this country will get into a very bigger debt trap. If the government says it doesn't have the resources enough to service those debts and therefore get Nigeria off a big debt trap which could be haunting us generation after generation, and that the only way it can escape and get all of us to escape from being debt slaves is by doing away with the resources in some of these facilities so that they can service the debts, at least for us to enjoy our freedom as a nation. Why would you rise against it? Because me, I'm afraid that if the debts are not paid, I could get into danger and my grandchildren could be debt slaves.
I doubt if that freedom is real. The freedom to pay your debt is not something you can call a freedom, particularly when the chains are still on your hands. Our debt profile is rising. It's over 30 trillion naira. That's as of September 2020. 24% of the 2021 budget is being used to service our debt. Our debt profile keeps growing, and there is no indication that we are going to reduce either our debt profile or stop ourselves from borrowing. So the problem, it is not freedom in that sense. So sell public assets to pay off debt where you are still borrowing and doing nothing to manage the resources you have, which is why the problem is not about selling the assets, as it were, but the context of what we are doing with those funds to stem the tide of waste, and principally to prevent this escalation of deficit that we've seen. If we have over 2 trillion last year, and this year is 5.6 trillion, what are we going to have next year? What are the assurances? Do we have the economic funding? Are they predicting it's going to go down next year? What about the price of oil? Do we have any certainty about what is going to happen to that? And in all these and those indices of international economic politics, we've not adjusted at all in our spending, particularly when the bulk of the budget goes to recurrent expenditure, majorly comprised of public officers. So that is the real problem. And that is why we need to have that important discussion now about selling public assets, our growing debt profile, and this growing deficit.
Kola, the selling our national assets to raise funds, to service debts, reduce the deficit, have enough funds to also look at the capital project. And your opposition to this policy raises a very fundamental question. Does Nigeria and its political actors have a national development philosophy to say, look, these are the kind of values that should drive this nation towards this objective end of a nation like this, like that, placing certain values on the citizen and placing his welfare at a particular level? Are you seeing our national political players operating within any discernible philosophy?
That is yet to be seen. And that is also at the heart of what we do at SERAP. As our name connotes, socio-economic rights and accountability projects. So socio-economic rights of Nigerians are the principal things that we fight for through the instrumentality of the law, using human rights as a veritable tool for this. But we've seen a lack of government commitment to these socio-economic rights. And now we've seen that those rights, those lofty rights and ideals contained in Chapter 2 of the Constitution have not been attended to at all. And this is not in the absence of a legal framework. Yes, we can say that the judiciary has pronounced that Chapter 2 is not justiciable. Yes, that's a legal position. But what about the various legal frameworks that empower and mandate government to do several things that will not seem come to pass? For instance, the Fiscal Responsibility Act clearly creates an obligation on government on borrowing and the use of borrowed funds. And you've also mentioned what you said is the use of these funds for capital projects. But what is the percentage of capital projects against the current expenditure, the capital expenditure of project expenditure in our budget? So essentially, we are not borrowing funds or selling public assets to fund capital projects. We are doing all this to fund more of recurrent expenditure than capital expenditure, and that itself is a problem. The Fiscal Responsibility Act, for instance, provides that borrowing should only be used for capital projects, and that there must be a cost-benefit analysis of that borrowing and those funds before borrowing. Do we have that in place? Is it within the public domain? Is that what is considered by the National Assembly at all before they approve application for loans? I'm sure that part of the executive duty, they place the medium-term finance framework before the National Assembly. And it's something that Nigerians should have access to be able to scrutinize why the National Assembly will even approve this project as well. And they will go ahead to increase them. What we can safely conclude is that government is not prioritizing the socioeconomic rights of the people. The apparent refusal to cut the cost of governance and the basic allowances and take-home pay of government and our political office holders is enough to conclude that socioeconomic welfare of Nigerians is not paramount in both government planning and expenditure. And one sad fact that brings this home, unfortunately, is COVID-19, the pandemic. We've seen the reactions of government. We've seen the way there is no cohesive response to it. We've seen the state of our health sector before now. During the pandemic, there is no improvement. We've not seen major budgetary improvements and allocations to health. What we have seen, even in the 2020 budget, the revised budget, and the 2021 budget, for instance, is just the allocation of the minimum provided by law to these sectors. So the National Health Act provides a minimum of 1% allocation to the National Health Fund. That is what we see in the budget. And the question is, why can't we have 2% of the consolidated revenue fund? Why not 3%, particularly in the pandemic year? And this just points to the obvious, that the government needs to do more to prioritize the economic rights of Nigerians and to actually do this by setting a good example.
My last question is going to say it is not expected that SERAP becomes a jack of all trade. But let me ask, each time issues like this arise, we tend to put the federal government on the spot. Yes, I understand that the federal government initiated this policy. But in terms of misapplication, misprioritization, even, permit me, some level of profligacy in our financial matters, the states are no less guilty than the federal government. Are you also focusing on the states to be able to at least establish that we are not replicating government unaccountability, government poor prioritization of rights of the citizens at the state level?
SERAP has done a lot of advocacy in that regard as well. And we have several lawsuits against all the 30 states, the government of 30 states, on various legal issues. Some of them are pending, most of them are pending in court. And we can put it in context. How many state budgets are available to the public? How much are the members of each state involved in the budget-making process of their state? And we have an unfortunate situation that the World Bank under the SIGNATURE program would have to give governors incentives to carry their people along in the budgetary process. That is how sad it is. Do the governors of each state need to be induced by the World Bank to make their budgetary processes open? But that is what we've seen happening. And even at that, we have I think we have 80% or so who have kept an open budget. Nigeria has a secretly open government partnership. Only few states have signed on to it. And that doesn't make either the budgetary or the expenditure process more accountable or transparent. SERAP has written various freedom of information requests to all the state governors on various issues of public expenditure. I can tell you, the response rate is less than 10%, and mostly always on the negative. So, when we talk about government, it is not only the federal government. It cuts across the three arms of government and the three tiers of government. But there are major policy issues, core policy issues, that take roots from the federal government by virtue of the 1999 Constitution and the type of federalism that we practice. And that itself appears to place the bulk of these issues at the doorstep of the federal government. But the states also carry an equal burden. For instance, payment of pensions to former governors. That is one very huge avenue of waste of public funds. SERAP is in court on this. Payment security votes. Governors and security votes. SERAP is in court on this as well. This also applies to all the states of the federation. So, by all means, it is not only restricted to the federal government, it applies to the state and even the local government. But SERAP is just one of the civil society organizations we have in Nigeria. We can't do everything. We write letters, open letters, advocacy, even public enlightenment programs, including some policy advisories to governments now and again. But how many of these have been taken? And taken in good faith at that. And that is why most times we end up in court. We are Nigerians and we are law-abiding citizens. We only go to the court for the court to enforce our rights when advocacy has failed. But we really hope that all the tiers of government and the arms of government will really rise up to carry out their statutory responsibilities to save all Nigerians. Because as we've seen with the pandemic, when this issue arises and the various challenges we face, I think we will all have to, ultimately the consequences will be affected.
Well. I've been speaking with Kolawole Oluwadare, the Deputy Director, Social Economic Rights and Accountability Project. He's been in Lagos and I am in Abuja. Kola, thank you for coming to the conversation.